Welcome to today's live stream conversation with the authors of the book, Team, Getting Things Done with Others. I'm Sally Haldorson, Managing Director of Porchlight Book Company. Porchlight is located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and specializes in selling and customizing books in bulk quantities while recommending and reviewing the best new nonfiction books from business to personal development to current events, which is what brings us here today with David Allen and Edward Lamont. David is an international best-selling author who is widely recognized as the world's leading expert on personal and organizational productivity, beginning with his flagship book, Getting Things Done. In fact, our company published the 100 best business books of all time in 2009, and Getting Things Done was included in that list and has stood the test of time. Edward has founded and grown the most successful Getting Things Done franchises worldwide and is co-founder and senior partner of Next Action Associates, the Getting Things Done partner for the UK and Ireland. Welcome, David and Ed, and congratulations on the new book, which I know could not have come at a better time for my own company as we transition into a more team-based approach to projects. And I have no doubt it will resonate with so many readers who are interested in proving how things get done in teams of all sorts. There are just barging right into it. There are likely many Getting Things Done fans and users attending today, but for those unfamiliar, I hope that you might start with introducing the methodology, which can, by the way, be found in an appendix in the book that we may refer to throughout this conversation as GTD, I suppose, down the line, and how it's evolved over the decades. David, should we start with you as the originator and then transition to Ed and how you as an individual user of the system first took the GTD principles and began to train them in corporate situations?
Sure, Sally, thanks for the invitation. I'll try to give a short version of a very long story. In my small little consulting practice, I was just working to explore myself what were techniques and principles that I could use to keep myself clear as my life was getting busier and more complex. And basically cobbled together. I didn't wake up one morning with some grand epiphany about this methodology. It was a long string of epiphanettes, if you will, over several years, where I would grab these pieces and I'd start to use them for myself, and they worked. Each one of them gave me more control, more focus, more clarity, more freedom to focus on the cool stuff I wanted to do. And then I turned around and started using those with my consulting clients, mostly small businesses, entrepreneurs and startups and so forth, in my network. And the same techniques worked for them. I went, wow, interesting. I seem to have come across something that might be somewhat universal, in terms of how this helps people, no matter what they're doing or what kind of business they're in, small, big, or whatever, or even personally. Yeah. How do I stay focused? How do I get rid of the distractions in my head? And, I, as a black belt martial artist and a lot of my spiritual meditation practices, I discovered the value of clear space, very practical values to have your head clear so you can stay focused and put your attention where you wanted it, the way you wanted it, on what you wanted it on. Kind of a big duh, but that's not that easy when life gets more complex and busier. So I discovered these techniques for myself. They became a lot of what my consulting was about. And then somebody in the big corporate training world saw what I was doing and said, David, gee, we need that whole outcome in our whole culture. Can you design some sort of a training program that can package this methodology in a way that we can reach maybe a lot of people with at least the game instead of one-on-one like you've been doing? And so I did, was highly successful. 1983, 84, created a pilot program for Lockheed in California. It was highly successful. And suddenly I found myself thrust into the corporate training world. So for the next 2-3 decades, I wound up just being in the corporate training business. Could have fooled me as a history major in Berkeley in California and at graduate school. Like, what? Really? Oh yeah. But they were the hungriest audience for what I'd come up with, because back in the early 80s, people were getting hit with the tsunami of email and corporate change and flattened organizations and more desired accountability down the ranks, et cetera, ad infinitum, in terms of the changes that were going on even then. And so, that became a lot of what my work was. And my consulting turned much more into coaching one-on-one with mid to senior level professionals in these companies that wanted to have me sit desk side with them and
Mhm.
actually implement this technology in a personal way with them. So thousands of hours I spent literally doing that. At some point, somebody said, "David, you should write the book." I went, really? Like, who'd have fooled me? But it took me that many years to find out what I'd figured out, and that nobody else seemed to have done it quite the same way, and that it was bulletproof. In the toughest environments that we implemented this, it went viral. So I said, well, if you can't punch a hole in this, maybe I can write the book. So I
Yeah.
did. So that was the first edition of Getting Things Done in 2001.
That is incredible. And when I've been explaining the book and just how hot it was, and in such demand at the time, why it hit our 100 best business books list, that nowadays we hear about the book Atomic Habits a lot as being sort of the viral methodology for habit building. And so I've been telling people of the younger generation, like this was the Atomic Habits of like the 1990s and 2000s, right? That just, it had a virality to it that I think would equal some of the virality today. So Ed, how did you then come upon Getting Things Done and become involved?
Well, I was one of the lost souls that David's book was written for, and I was working. I transitioned into doing corporate training, coaching, and consulting, and was relatively successful at it, but I couldn't really feel the success because my stress levels were right up here. I was flying around. I was doing great work for big, wonderful companies, getting well paid, and not really enjoying it very much. And somebody saw what was going on, gave me the book, and I didn't read it, of course, because I didn't have time to read the book. And that then, yeah, well, no, I got on a flight to New York, and I basically in 20, 30 minutes just flicked through it. And in those 20 minutes, I got 3 ideas that were paradigm shifts for me. Like if that's true, then I can have a completely different relationship with my work. So I implemented it. I got huge value, implemented it again, gave it to my secretary at the time. And, we implemented it together, got most of it backwards, but still got huge value. And then eventually I went to see David in Boston in 2004. And we tried to get something going that didn't work. It took to about 2008, I think, before we finally did. And then for the last 15 years, I've been doing, corporate training and coaching here in the UK and in Europe. I mean, we're kind of all over the place. That then eventually led to the Teams material.
So you really practice what you now preach, right? That you've ended up being a practitioner yourself, and then have helped people sort of find that guidance as well. I actually you just mentioned that you gave the book to your secretary, and that reminded me of something that's written in the book, and perhaps it was that story. But you employ a pretty broad definition for what a team is and how you want this book to be used. And you mentioned that it might be refining that relationship with your administrative assistant. It might be a team at work. It might be sort of organizational teamwork, or it might be at home, where there is, later on in one of the chapters, there's an example of how a family with lots of busy kids involved in all the things could use a system like this to help them with that kind of teamwork. How can you give us a little bit more about what it means, like how you want this book to be used in this sort of wide variety of teams?
Well, a lot of what we did with Teams is to kind of look at, okay, well, what worked about the original book, and what do we want to pull forward from that? And one of the things was, the first book is based on the principles of productivity, of extremely competent workflow management. And so we were really clear we wanted to do that for teams as well. And once you define teams in the way that we have, which is, it's effectively any group of individuals who are getting together in order to achieve a common aim, then you need to identify principles that are applicable across any kind of team that as we've defined it. So that's what we've done. We've tried to look at this in a way that you could literally take the book, and if you wanted to, probably not with small children, but with, relatively older children, you could go through the book and work out, well, what do we need to do here in order to get the benefits of what corporate teams are getting?
Mm-hmm.
And the example of the assistant is, for me in my coaching, what I saw was it is actually one of the most important relationships that executives have. If it's not working, it's really, really hard for them to extend their reach.
I think one of the interesting things about this book, and please tell me if I've simplified this or I've interpreted it incorrectly, but I think it's one way we can look at it, that getting things done is addresses the individual level of productivity and organization. And then this book, as we're saying, applies to teams, but I think it's also a book about communication, the intersecting of, as you say in the subtitle, it's about working with others, right? And so it's expanded into this, needing to learn a common language, needing to have a framework in order to make your meeting successful. Do you see that as sort of the connector there is communication and connecting with others?
It's certainly a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, the way that we've thought about this was, you've got, if you have like the individual at this level and they have a certain set of problems, and then you have the team at this level and there is a slightly different set of problems up here. Mm-hmm. You can't solve these problems up here from this level. And that's why this book is based on these problems, because they so directly impact what the individuals are doing. So that's communication is a big piece of that, but there's a whole host of other principles that also are in play.
And one of the reasons, Sally, it's such a critical piece is because you could be clear, Sally, mm-hmm. and highly productive and clear, and you're focused. I could be clear, highly productive and focused. We get together and say, there's something we want to accomplish together. We just expanded exponentially the complexity that has to be involved to make sure that you and I are coming to the same kind of agreements we need to. Are you handling that or am I handling that? What are we actually trying to accomplish together? Do we have any standards about how we're going to work together and rules of engagement, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that's what Ed and I have unpacked, is what are all those mechanics? Mechanic, not to sound cold and mechanical,
sure.
But mechanics meaning the basics of what you need to manage the complexity of engaging with other people. Communication is obviously critical in many ways, for sure.
Complexity, I think, is a wonderful way of putting it and seeing it on those levels. So I'm going to ask a slightly broader question here that you address toward the beginning of the book, but it's really, as we talk about complexity, why is teaming, to use that terminology, so important now? And in fact, you mention in the book that we also are going to have to learn to team with AI so that humans don't become redundant. Like, this is a new kind of teaming we're going to have to learn. So why is teaming so central to this next phase of, or new work, I think you phrase it?
Well, and I think if you just look at the complexity of the problems that we face, it's very obvious that individuals are going to struggle to resolve them. We need to get together to solve the problems that we have, and the more that we can do that effectively and efficiently, the better chance we'll have at dealing with things that are really quite gnarly. So that's one of the reasons that we think teaming is, both David and I, we started in individual development, right? Mm-hmm. Personal development and individual improvement, mm-hmm. and spent decades doing it. And we noticed, sort of 5 years ago, the conversation had very much changed. It was all about collaboration. It mm-hmm. wasn't anymore about individual productivity. It was about collaboration. How can we get teams to function better? So we're not wasting all this time in useless meetings or in huge distribution lists that's wasting everyone's time. There are some pretty simple fixes for that, mm-hmm. If you want to collaborate well.
One of the driving motivations behind this book, and I think this echoes where you started out, David, when you first came across this sort of methodology, is that you want to make teamwork more efficient, but you also want to keep it healthy, right? And this was, as you said, to make space, to allow for work to actually get done. That's why we want to apply this framework. And in fact, you write, quote, "The question we should be asking is this: what level of performance can we sustain over time without damaging the people on the team, their relationships, or the environment? While on the other hand, there are plenty of teams that are working sustainably from a health perspective, but not performing anywhere near their potential. A desire for harmony puts paid to performance, and they can work for years, decades, with an acceptable level of mediocrity that betrays both their potential and the impact they could be having on their clients," unquote. How do we strike the balance between being high performing as a team, but also keeping the health of the team robust?
Well, I think that's got to be in conversation. So we come back to communication. One of the things, again, that we took from the first book, which was really, really useful, is that in the first book, David lays out the principles. He does not say you have to do it this way and this way and this way. So we've tried to stay away from, here's a definition of healthy high performance, right? Because each team kind of needs to do that for itself. It needs to know, what is health for us, mm-hmm. and what is performance for us. I think one of the biggest challenges that teams have right now is that performance is very often much easier to measure than health. Mm-hmm. And what gets measured gets done, famously. So it's almost like there's a default lean into how are we going to perform? What is good performance? Are we there yet? And there's not enough conversation going on about the physical health, the mental health, the social health, and the spiritual health of the team, and indeed the team members. And all of those things are, for the individuals on the team, at least as important as economic success, right? But we consistently default to what's the number we're going to have next year. So the team needs to have good conversations about what they think healthy high performance is for them.
Not only that, what's changing the game is how flexible teams need to be these days. How much people, 3 people left. Now we have 2 new people. Who just left? Who are the 2 new people? How do we get them involved? And a healthy high performance is not just health of the people involved, but health of the team structure itself. Mm. Can the team maintain itself, recreate itself as needed, reintegrate new stuff it needs to deal with, refocus, recalibrate, and still stay a healthy team? So I think there's health in terms of the team itself, as well as the healthy individuals. Obviously, if you have people who are dysfunctional personally, you're not going to have a healthy team.
Yeah.
You need both. It's like in soccer or football. Come on, you can't have, inexperienced players, even with a good coach, that are going to win games. Mm-hmm. But you can't be winning games and burning your players out or having them leave because there's a better team to go play in. So these things work very much together. But to Ed's point, who knows exactly where that point is? Right. Somebody has to own the thing.
And awareness is key, right? Awareness.
Of course, always is. And perspective. Perspective is the slipperiest and most valuable commodity you'll have on the planet. Do we have the right focus as a team? Do we have the right focus on how we're working with each other? Do we have the right focus in our communication, or do we have the right focus in our meetings? Mm-hmm. All this is about where you're putting your attention and how conscious that is, because you can have people in similar situations. Some people with the right perspective are going to win. Some people with a suboptimal perspective are going to lose.
There was, that reminded me of a question I have prepared for a little later, but I'm going to jump on this and say that as I was reading this, and I don't know, there's been a lot of teamwork in my life and my professional life, but it took me back to those group projects assigned in high school or in your freshman year of college or in introductory courses that elicited groans from most people because they knew the perils and knew what roles the people in the group were going to end up, that there was going to be a split of ownership, responsibility, showing up, who's going to take on the extra work that someone else didn't do. And I think that experience, not only will it be more important, I think, in schooling now that we can look everything up on Google or employ AI at some point, we're going to be working together more as we go forward. But I think also that these group projects experiences are very transferable to teams and organizations. And my question about that is, and you mentioned perspective and dysfunction and all of that. Like, how do we not revert to our standard personality types through the life of a team or a project? And how will this getting things done framework help that, prevent that?
Well, I think there's a few different ways. So if you, in the chapter on team, we define the sort of what we think are the 5 principles of a team. Which are clarity, open communication, sufficient trust, learning, and diversity. So those things under clarity and open communication, I think you begin to move into what we define as working standards. And it's when the team takes the time to have those conversations that you can begin to get it away from personalities, right? We were very clear. Also, the other thing that we were clear about when we started the book was we don't want to do team dynamics. We don't want to do conflict resolution, because the first book was quite. I'm getting the word in the wrong language, but it was quite factual. It wasn't like you need to see your therapist to work out your motivation for going and doing things. It was, no, get the thing, think about what the thing is, think about what the next action is and what the outcome is, and you'll be better off. So we wanted that quality of thing here as well. So if the team can get away from those team dynamics long enough just to define, how do we want to do this together? I may not like you. You may not like me, but if we have just enough respect for each other that we will agree to do things in a way that respects each of us, then we can probably get beyond having fights about stuff that is really kind of meaningless inside of the purpose of the team.
Yeah, I feel like this propulses a team, right? Like there's propulsion once you get that framework in place. David?
Yeah, there is. And back to your previous point, even subtle things that most people sort of take for granted. In meetings, you've got extroverts that are going to talk more than the introverts, right? Are they given permission to sort of run the meeting? And the introverts don't have room to have their voice heard or to be asked for their opinion about what everybody else is talking about. I mean, these are simple sort of human communication dynamics, but they can make a huge difference in terms of the stress on the team and the fact that people walk out and have, what I inappropriately probably call urinalysis. Like, well, oh, wow, did you hear what was going on? Oh my God, I didn't get it, yada. Yep. And all that around the coffee machine, kind of inappropriate chatter, inappropriate offline communication can really undermine the health of a team, period. So even fairly simple stuff like that, you can create mechanics that will prevent that, or at least ameliorate those kind of negative dynamics.
One of the things that I want to also go back to, you mentioned sports teams a couple minutes ago, and in the book you introduce a sort of cycle of improvement, and I guess this is where I'm getting the propulsion part, or benefit that comes from investing in the getting things done on the individual and then the team level. And I'm going to quote this again. There is a pressing need, you write, quote, to connect and align individual excellence and wider team performance. As each player gets better, or team member, then the team learns to play better together. And that starts to shape the culture and identity of the team. Then once the culture is strong enough, the identity of the team begins to impact the individual and team performance. So it seems like a self-feeding in a really beneficial way, not a chasing your own tail way, to to just continue to get better and better throughout the practice of this kind of methodology. Sorry, go ahead.
You have a question? Go ahead.
No, I just realized I didn't actually ask you the question, but let's expound on that.
Yeah. So again, when I was talking about the individual level and the team level, and of course there's probably a higher level, which is organizational or cultural level. You do need all three to get the sort of maximum benefits out of whatever kind of changes you're doing. But the individual is probably the easiest because there's the most control for individuals in that. You can train individuals. They still need to practice, but they can do their practice. Team is very difficult, or it's much more difficult than the individual level to get people to play together well, and those are slightly different practices, right? But it does begin to knit together what everybody's doing in terms of their own practice. And then at the top level, you've got the cultural level, which we have, frankly, we've decided to stay away from because it's so vast. I mean, it may be the subject of another book, who knows? But at this point, we thought we can see there's a lot of low-hanging fruit at the team level. And if the team starts to define its working standards and play better together, it will actually start to affect the culture. And the culture will then start to feed the self-belief of the individuals, et cetera, et cetera. So your cycle is absolutely in place.
Yeah,
Oh, I think you froze, David. We'll put a pause on that.
Wow!
Wi-Fi.
I can't wait.
There we go. We got the Wi-Fi back.
Let's go. Right. Let's go for the next meeting, as opposed to, oh God, another meeting.
Yeah.
And I would imagine a really healthy soccer team or football team is going, wow, let's go to practice because we're going to, we're waiting for Saturday's game and we're going to go and we're going to figure out a new game. We got a new game plan. We got whatever. So that's propulsion. If you have the former, oh God, another team meeting, then you're not in healthy high performance. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting, we always talk about chicken, egg, cart before the horse, culture eat strategy for breakfast kind of stuff. But I think what's interesting here is that I think sometimes we feel like we have to solve the culture stuff first, which is not to say it's not important, but you can also do that by creating a structure like this where people are working better together, and then that ends up helping to improve the culture. It doesn't always have to come the other way.
Well, this is one of the things that we decided was a useful way into the culture change thing, because I think it's something like 70 or 80% of culture change initiatives fail. In my observation over time, and certainly David and I in our conversations, it was very often because they were far too vague in what they were trying to do. And if you look at, what is the definition of culture? For most people, if you cook it right down, it's the way we do things around here.
Yep.
This is the way we do it when no one's looking. This is the way we do it. If the boss is watching, sometimes we'll do it a bit differently, but actually this is the way. That's the culture. That's why we thought it was so important to get granular about the standards for how we work with each other, because that starts to shape your culture.
That's a great way of putting that. I think the other thing is, though, that you don't jettison purpose, which we often say is part of culture, right? But that purpose is essential to this. How can purpose be used as a driver as well as a touchstone for teams?
It's a driver for everything. It's why you were a team. You're not a team unless you've got some purpose to work together towards something, right? So team, by its very definition, requires or implies purpose. There's some reason me and my taxi driver want to get to this place, and we've got some standards about how safely or slow we want to drive, or whatever, and how much tip I'm gonna give them, or whatever. It's true with you and your kids. What are we trying to do for Christmas? And how we play together. It could be, why do I want Sally to be home by 8 o'clock tonight? What's that purpose?
Right.
So all of this is implicit. Seldom is it explicitly talked about. It's sort of assumed for a lot of these, and it's assumed for a lot of teams too. So that's one of the things Ed and I have tried to address. It's like, hey, slap, slap, wake up. Why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
Come on.
Why
Because that has to be the driver for all the decision making you're doing about your standards and about how you work together and the roles you're playing and all of those critical elements to the mechanics of how good teams work together.
And it's actually is really interesting when you start to use these principles in sort of non-traditional teams. I was out doing a canoe trip with some friends and family, and we took the time to run through some of the work that's in the book. And when we got to purpose, it was a really, really interesting conversation, and it completely deepened the level at which we communicated throughout the rest of the trip. We got to it on like day 2 or 3. We defined purpose around a campfire, and it led to a really, really rich conversation about why we were there and what we were wanting to get out of that. A lot of which was, deepening relationship. So that fundamentally changes the way, if we were just there to, have a good time and complete 100 kilometers in our canoes, right? That's different than we're there to deepen relationships, get to know each other because we don't see each other very much. And so we slowed down, frankly, right? So that started to shape what was healthy high performance on our team.
My wife and I did that exercise for our wedding. What's the purpose of no, come on. How many people getting married have ever had that conversation? Like, why are we having a wedding?
Right.
It was fascinating. And, we had a 10, 15-minute conversation. And it was kind of, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And there were 2 or 3 good reasons. We'd like to get everybody together in a nice, efficient way so we don't have to, straggle them out across 2 years to give them a chance to say hello and share their love with us and congratulations. So, so that was a combination of, we're doing that. And also to, look good in society and do all that good stuff that some people get married for. So that it was quite valuable. Yeah.
So I want to transition into talking a little bit more nuts and bolts, which is sort of the middle section of the book. But I'm going to divert myself one moment there because, Ed, you said something about take the time, right? Like you went on this canoe trip and you took the time to talk about purpose, why you're there. And David, you said the same thing, like taking 10 to 15 minutes to have a conversation about why you're going to the trouble of because they're not easy. Weddings are not easy to put on, and how you get in sync and lead with purpose with that. And I think time is such a critical piece to this. And I say that as someone who is not organized. And I really related to how you described yourself, Ed, initially with being introduced to getting things done. And I have this ridiculous theory about people, probably just to explain myself, and that there are people who take that extra time to do something that saves them time later. And there are people who don't take the extra time to do something to begin with, which then costs them time later. And I always think of it in terms of, you're at the line, you're buying something at a store, and you get your debit card out and you swipe your card, and you're either a person who takes the time to put the card back in the wallet and into the right area of your bag, or you're the person who sticks it in your raincoat and then it stops raining, you can't find your debit card 3 days later, right? And you think, why didn't I put it away first? And I always think of that in terms of it literally is probably 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds of time to save you pain later, I guess. So what is the convincing argument for people like me who put the debit card in the jacket to take the time to implement, or at least have a primary discussion first? May take a few days, may postpone taking action steps on a project to have this conversation first, to implement at least a step or 2 in this process. What's the argument for people like me?
Well, I think you don't have a choice about having pain. You can choose when to take your pain.
Right.
Right. And you can choose, to a certain extent, I think, how much pain you have to experience. And for me, so like, I hope it came across in the book. Like, I'm not an organized guy. That's why David's book really transformed my life, because I was a seriously unorganized person, and the structures and things that were suggested were simple and easy to implement. So I look organized, but that's not in my being. My being is, I want to go play. I'm up for play. I'm up for improvisation. I'm up for all that stuff. Organization, not really my thing, until I worked out that with a minimal amount of investment on the front end, I could get more play on the back end. Right? So that's how I think about it. I think both are difficult. I do not think there is an easy option. I think doing GTD is not easy. It's just going to get you better results than if you are, looking for your credit card in one of 30 jackets when you need to make the next payment and you're not wearing that jacket, right? Yeah. Where is there more pain? In the 15 seconds it takes you to put it back into the right place, or in the flustered mess that you become when you realize you don't have the card with you?
Yep. That's a pretty convincing argument. David, do you second that?
I have no clue how to convince you. Ed convinced himself.
Good.
You have to convince yourself. I can't convince you about that. I can demonstrate it. I can show you, hey, here's a great way to do that. You might want to try that out. Hey, and you are the one who has to then taste, ooh, that does feel better. Right. And then you have to get used to the feeling better. See, Sally, the reason most people resist all of this is not overwhelm. It's ambient anxiety that you're willing to tolerate. That's simple. It's it. That's easily described, easily changed. How much can you start to experience lack of or much less of that anxiety? How would you like to not have to be waked up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh my God, where's my credit card?
Did someone steal it? Do I have charges on my account? Yeah. I think both of those are really points that can be taken to heart for the person who might want to explore or test out the resolution of some of that anxiety.
Our job is not to. I'm not a motivational speaker. I don't know if Ed considers himself one or not. We define the game. How much of the game you want to play, whether you want to play it or not, whether you're going to find value out of playing this game. That's your job, Sally, not ours. Yeah. We just had to define the game so that then you could say, yeah, I'm going to play that, or I'm going to play this part of this, or whatever.
So we have, there's this middle section of the book is very much about applying the getting things done framework to teams in more nuts and bolts fashion than I've been talking about it so far. And for those, I'm sure, who are listening today or watching today or later, who are getting things done advocates, they've used it, they know all the terminology, they want to know how to level up with that. Let's talk a little bit about what that section looks like. And I know that I think my maybe lead-in question to that would be, is it necessary for someone coming to this book to have read and implemented getting things done? Or then for the people who have read and implemented it, how is that middle section a level up from the original text?
Well, I think you don't have to. We have included a short summary appendix so that you could at least get a sense of what the original material was about. It really wouldn't hurt you to have read it. Like, it'll probably make your reading a lot more rich, because you'll be familiar with the original concepts. But we did try to write the book to be able to be read by anybody just picking it up, and to walk away from every chapter with things that they could use the next day in their teams. And those, the difference really is in the examples used. I mean, there's some individual examples. Usually we're using an individual example simply to set the stage for how that plays out on a team, how that plays out in some structure that is more than one individual trying to get something done. That's how I see it. What do you think, David? You're on mute for some reason.
Sorry.
There you go.
Sally, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but you could open that book at random and read any one or two paragraphs, and you're going to get an aha, potentially. I did, even after writing the book. I was like, oh yeah. Oh yeah, we wrote that. Oh yeah. What a good idea. It's very, very rich, and it is something you can actually snack on the book and just find whatever kind of rings your bell about it. But, as much I said with GTD, this is not like running with scissors. There's nothing dangerous about any of this. You implement any one little piece of this, and it will probably improve conditions around you, working with other people. So ideally, if someone wrote an endorsement about this, he said, this is a book to read at least 5 times and keep on your desk. Because as things change, your teams will change. Your perception of how to work with a team will change. And so there's going to be a lot of material here that you have missed the first time through. So I think we wrote it that evergreen and that rich. I could be wrong, but we'll find out.
I got a lovely note through today from someone who purchased, didn't just buy one copy and read it 5 times. They bought 2 copies and were listening to one while reading the other, which I thought was, and they felt that they were in their own personal seminar, which I thought was
That's
very, very motivated approach.
Right. They're all in. Let's see, how do I say this? Because we have 2 different levels here. We have like organizational leaders who are committed to a team-based approach to strategy or projects management or just getting things done. And then we have like team leaders who also sort of want to introduce these concepts and get everybody, lead that meeting maybe that says like, let's take 15 minutes to determine our purpose. Can you talk a little bit about what the role of the leader is in helping teaming succeed in an organization and why you suggest leadership is like gardening, which I found very helpful?
Well, I mean, the leader as gardener metaphor simply came from searching through a variety of options that were not appropriate, and then we came up with, I think originally it was plumber, because they're really, really important. And the best work that they do, you don't see, and if you don't have good plumbing, you have a real mess. We then went to mechanic, and we just decided that was a bit too cold because the team is a living system, not a machine. Right? It's machines are kind of easy to understand, but humans are not machines, and that's when we ended up with the gardener metaphor, which is really it's about leadership as someone who is not forcing plants to grow, but is creating the conditions in which plants can grow well. And that involves, making structures that the plants can climb on. That involves getting weeds out of the way. That involves, so you can stretch the metaphor until it breaks. But the way that we thought about leadership is much more as someone who is an enabler of things rather than someone who's, like the kind of gung-ho, big, hairy, audacious goals kind of personality. Because very often that starts to get in the way. And once they leave, the team is disabled, right? Because they've disempowered people through their personality. And it's much better if they step back a little bit, allow the team to perform and give them air cover. And by the way, that's a full-time job. Just deciding what is going to get done, who's going to do it, tracking and coordinating it. It's a full-time job.
I think the tracking is an interesting note there, because throughout the book, you mention how difficult it is now to, measure knowledge work versus how we might think of things like Lean or Six Sigma or apply those sort of manufacturing standards to measuring and tracking and pursuing outcomes. And if you can talk a little bit about how this book, which, I mean, I think this is also to jump on top of that, is to say that the pandemic and then the post-pandemic world, where we have these different job styles that are happening, where we have more people, maybe it's a generational thing, where we have more people doing work on teams than move on to other companies or move on to other projects. There's so much more movement in our teams, and we're doing so much work that is less able to be measured. How does that fit into using this framework?
David, you've got a nice take on that, so why don't you have
Well,
a go?
a whole lot of the issue is roles.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a subcontractor coming on for just this project. What is his or her role? Right? And what are they going to be expected to produce? What does success look like? And to your point, in a manufacturing, roles can be, I'm a widget cranker, therefore I crank widgets, and therefore that's my job is really clear. I show up at a bunch of uncranked widgets, tell me exactly how to spend my day. How about head of human resources? They've done a good job when what's true. Head of finance, they've done a good job when what's true. Head of admin, COO. So the higher up you kind of get in leadership labels, the more challenging and the more squishy it becomes in terms of defining exactly what your work is. Come on, the late great Peter Drucker said your biggest job as a knowledge worker is defining your work. So Getting Things Done did a very good job, I think, of helping people define what their work actually is. Here's the outcome I'm after. Here's the project. Here's the next step I need to take. How do I allocate resources to make that outcome happen? Well, that's the zeros and ones of productivity, right? So what we did was try to translate that into a larger team management and even leadership context. What's the purpose? So again, it comes back to who owns the team, and that's a tricky question.
Right.
Who's going to make the decision about what the purpose of the team is and whether it's on purpose or not?
And if that stuff isn't documented, so again, coming back to your question, if that stuff isn't well documented and available to people as they join, then they're going to need months rather than days or weeks to get a sense of how do we work, how am I supposed to work on this team? What is the culture on this team? And to David's point, if the roles aren't well defined, how is the person who's joining going to get that delivered to them from the person who's leaving? Again, just clear definition will save boatloads of time.
I think you even have in the section on roles, it's defined, the sort of department's defined, the role of the person in their job is defined, and then the role of that person within the team or on the project is defined. Like, that's a critical part of this. I want to make sure that I get to some of the pre-submitted questions here, but I'm going to ask one more that I think circles us back to that first question about high performance and health. And I'd like to talk a little bit about chapter 12 with the provocative title, If You Don't Have a No, Your Yes Means Nothing. We have to get better at saying no, because saying yes, but can be overwhelming to people. And we think it is beneficial to say, yes, we can do that project. Yes, we can do more. Yes, we should do it now. Yes, we can take it on, like it's a badge of honor to say yes. But there's a whole bunch of conflicting evidence that says the more you say yes, the less you get done. So how is saying yes worse than saying no? Or why is saying no better than saying yes all the time?
Well, saying yes all the time, I mean, that's an easy one, right? Yeah. Saying yes all the time simply destroys your credibility.
Yeah.
You can't deliver everything, so your reputation is toast in those circumstances. So it's not a blanket no, but it is certainly having a great and very, very strong no filter for what's coming at you in the course of a day or a week. And as a team, and this is this is part of why we think that differentiation between individual and team was so important. The chapter on no was in fact twice as long as the one that you read. And we finally decided, hey, we just need to take the individual stuff out because, you know, that belongs in another book, another article, whatever. This is about teams. And what we really wanted was for the team to start to give some support to the individuals for saying no, because the individuals are overwhelmed and the team is overwhelmed. And then you end up with a lot of very unhappy stakeholders.
Yeah.
Right. And you're not getting done what you said you value. So everyone is starting to feel stress and burnout, you know, disengagement, whatever. So the no is really about how can we pare this back so we can see progress, enough progress that we're motivated to continue. Because losing every day,
right?
I don't know about you, I don't find it very motivating.
Not only that, a really good question to ask after you say no is, and here's why. Because that then produces the propulsion or produces the affirmation of, and here's why I can't agree to that right now. It's a great idea, but right now we don't have the bandwidth because we're trying to do X. And that would then undermine our ability to do X really well. And if we do X really well, by the way, that's going to make it easier for us to say yes, you know, next month or whenever, you know, whatever. You could be politically correct about all this, and even more correct just in terms of perspective.
I think like we need to convey that no is not meant to be an obstacle or not meant to be, I mean, obviously it can be at times where someone is throwing up an obstacle, but generally speaking, saying no that has a thought out why, and perhaps then if we focus on this thing now and we move to that thing later, we will actually be better at that thing, or we will be faster at that thing. That is like, we need that extra, not just to say, no, we can't do it, don't have the time, don't have whatever, but that we actually have a well thought out because X.
But I think it's important to say that no doesn't always sound like no, right? No, very often, a great no is yes, if, right? Yes, absolutely. I can see this is really, really important. Want to take it on for you. I can do that if you take away these 4 things, because I'm not going to be able to do them if I'm doing this thing that you say you really care about. That's a fabulous no.
Yeah. I think you two both are motivational speakers. I've certainly taken a lot of notes on my notes to take away from this conversation myself. I'm going to switch a little bit to some of the questions from people who are super excited about this book. And I felt like the questions, I could basket them in under a couple of topics. And we have a few people who are asking about how can we use this book? And we did touch on this a little bit already, but let's make sure to address it. That Brett and Braden both asked the question about how these principles can be applied to non-formal teams or families when there's no formal team leader, or in Braden's case, struggling to get my wife to plan anything. So how can this methodology perhaps resolve some conflict at home?
Well, I think like so much of this stuff, I mean, it's probably one of the most asked questions. David, you'll have been asked it more often than I, just because longer time on the pitch. But you know, how do I get my spouse to do this? Is probably one of the most asked questions that we ever get. We're not playing at that level in this case, right? It's much more about, okay, well, how can we play as a team better together? And there, I would say it's really about, you know, starting where you have a sense that your partner cares. If your partner is the challenge, if you know, if it's a family unit, you know, which aspect of these principles as they're described do they actually care about? Is it purpose? Is it vision? Is it, you know, how we work as a team? Is it open communication? Like, what is it that they care about? And try and get them some wins there to, you know, hopefully use the honey pot instead of use the carrot instead of the stick. I can't remember what the other part of the honey pot is. That would be my take. It's really difficult to start where you can.
A lot of great advice about not asking why, but asking how. So G dear, how are you going to make this work for yourself? Is there some way I can help you do what you're trying to do? How does this work for you? Or how will it work for you? Or whatever. So reframing the question sometimes helps.
I really appreciated. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You don't want to put them on the spot.
Yeah.
You lose.
That's true. Now, you don't want to change. You can't change a person. You can only agree upon making change, I think. And then another question that came up a lot from Philip, Tyrone, Yar, Joshua, tools and apps, right? We have so many tools for organizing. We have so many apps that we can download. We've got Microsoft Planner, we've got Slack, Asana, Todoist, all of those things. I don't know if you can recommend a tool or an app that would be particularly helpful for teams, or if you have any thoughts about utilizing those kinds of tools.
Well, there's an entire chapter on what we see as the principles of using those things. I think it's, recommendations would be unhelpful simply because most people's amount of choice is extremely limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're set down in front of something and they have to work out how to use it, and very often are given no instruction on how to do so. So you end up with a real Wild West kind of implementation in most teams, in most organizations, where very often using collaborative software works well for an individual team with a very, very focused, purpose and outcome, often doing things like software development or manufacturing. But as you move up through the organization, the people who are on, they end up on, 3,600 different channels. That doesn't work for them anymore. So it really requires a lot of thought, again, on the front end. Like, how do we want to use this? What are we using it for? And in the book, we try to give the principles of how to think about the tool that you basically are sitting in front of in a way that makes it as efficient as ever possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important, if we just go back to the individual level, one of the things we've said for years is there is no perfect tool. They all have, pros and cons. It's really just a question of which of those pros do you like a lot and which of those cons can you live with?
So the last question I have, and we are about 1 minute until we're done, until we wrap this up, is from Amy, who's asking for advice for teams whose members work on opposite sides of the globe, or we have that constant question of some people being at home, some people being in the office. Where do they start with this?
David, do you want to have a go at that one?
Who owns the team? That's where you start. And then they have to decide, who are my players? What's the purpose of the team? And then how do I work with this mishmash of, ingredients that I've got now to try to accomplish that purpose? It has to be left up to that, and because you can't determine personalities, you can't determine technologies, you can't determine, and a lot of these people are ad hoc. They're going to come and go. And you got time zones that come and go that are weird and strange. So you just have to work those things out. And not necessarily easy, but simple ideas, simple things. Okay, here's how we're going to work together. Here's one example. I had a CEO of a major financial corporation, and he didn't like to carry a planner with him or even his telephone address book. So he would call his secretary from Hong Kong, and she was in London, at 3:00 in the morning, getting somebody's phone number. It's like she got paid big bucks, but she needed it to be able to deal with that. But that was just up to their agreement about how they were managing, managing all of that. So that's kind of an extreme example, but who owns it? Who's making the decision about it? And then are people willing to play based upon the purpose of the team and the parameters that are set up? In terms of here's how we play. And it's a work in progress these days, really. Ed's got some clients and people we know who've done a good bit of thinking about all the different channels that they're using and a real rigorous protocol. Here's what you use SMS for. Here's what we use our internal, chat for. Here's what we use email for. Here's what we use the phone for, and gave them some, outline of parameters and protocols for that. That wasn't a simple thing to come up with.
I think that is really what's so compelling about this book is we've talked a lot about the bigger picture stuff in that you cover in the book. And then there's also just a load of practical next step advice, whether it's about emails and inboxes or communicating with one another, what you start out with in when you want to review a meeting. And I think that's what all of the readers of the book and all of the fans of your work are going to take away from this book, is that it really does start with purpose, and it starts with agreement. That continues through with communication. And then here are the tools that you can implement to help you do that in the way that you best need them to do that in your family, in your team, in your organization. And so it really covers both sides of that need for people that is so prevalent right now because of all of the change that's happening in our work lives. So this is timely, usable, thoughtful, and I really want to thank the two of you for all of the work that you've put into writing this book and the time that you've spent with me today. And I hope that you find just as much excitement around this book as the excitement that started decades ago with getting things done.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you very much.